Okay, a special good evening to each and every one. I want to say a warm welcome to those of you all who are looking at the show for the first time. My name is Stephen Edwards, and this is Making Moves. And today we're going to be discussing some of the insecurities and pitfalls that persons who are interested in having a podcast might come into. And, I would have asked some questions to some persons who wanted to start a podcast and really haven't started for whatever reason. So I wanted to address some of those reasons this evening. So before we go any further, without any further ado, let's just start how we start every Thursday. Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. We thank you, Lord God, for who you are. I pray, Lord God, for each and every person on the line who is hearing my voice. I ask you, Lord God, to cover them and keep them, Father. And I pray, Lord God, that they would be strengthened and given the courage to do that which you have tasked them to do in on this earth. Through Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen. All right. So we have started, and so all right. I wanna just say, you know, um, for persons like who are interested in doing a podcast, podcasting has become very popular within the last few years. And there are many persons who want to do a podcast, who are interested, who always wanted to do some sort of talk show. But for whatever reason, they haven't really started. And I wanted to address some of the issues that I've heard for as the reasons for persons not having started, their podcasts, and the fact of the matter is that right now technology has been at an all-time low in terms of cost. So really and truly, there aren't as many barriers to come out with a podcast as it used to be, right? So one of the first things that people always tell me is that, equipment, right? Everybody wants to have fancy equipment to do a podcast. Now, one of the things that you would notice is that I'm not just on a laptop. This microphone that I bought here, right? I bought it when I was in Trinidad, and it cost me 20 TT, which is about like about what, $3 US, right? And that's it. That's the equipment. Right now, I am having a podcast. You watching a floating head with no big design. But here's the thing. With my podcast, what I try to do is make the information that I present so valuable, right? That even though it's just this floating head that you're seeing, right? You take the value of what is the information that is being brought to you. That's the value that I bring. So it's not an, I am in the middle of actually building a set, and I had a lot of fancy equipment back in Trinidad and Tobago, and I will be doing a premiere podcast, right? But the fact of the matter is that I'm holding a podcast every single Thursday for the reason being that I am actually building an audience for that bigger show, right? What does this show basically do? It basically provides opportunity for persons of Caribbean heritage and persons in the Caribbean to have opportunities around the world. All right. That's the making moves. This particular section deals with persons who are interested in starting a podcast, right? And we, for some reason, right, everybody thinks that in order to start a podcast, you have to have all of this fancy equipment. It's not so. Right now, as I said before, the things that I am using, all right, is Zoom, right? And if you do the 40-minute, right, and a 40-minute podcast is long. Right now, I on a Thursday, I generally run to about half an hour. And I have persons on my Zoom right now, right, who would come on, and Zoom will basically send to Facebook. So I can podcast on Zoom. I can have an audience here on Zoom, but I can also now stream on Facebook and YouTube via Zoom. The point I'm trying to make is that starting a podcast is not that costly, right? If you have a phone and that phone has a camera, basically you have the equipment to start the podcast. Zoom is free until 40 minutes, and all you have to do is basically structure your show that is just 30 minutes long. And if you can do that, right? Because you would see by the end of the show, it wouldn't cross 40 minutes. You have the software, you have the hardware, which is your phone. And as I said before, I picked up this mic when I was in Trinidad, right? And it cost me 20 TT, right? Which is about 3 US for those who are different of us. Excuse me. Right. Yeah. So for those of you who are thinking about getting fancy equipment, that's not necessary. It totally isn't necessary. The cost of fancy equipment and a whole studio is all for nothing if you don't have a following. You don't have anybody listening to your message. You don't have anybody. You haven't identified who are the persons that you're targeting. You haven't identified, what are the problems that you're solving with your podcast. All those kinks should be worked out. So by the time that you're ready to actually launch your podcast with all that fancy equipment, you have an audience that can appreciate what you have to offer. As I said before, all you're looking at right now is just a floating head, right? There's no big fans. I'm in a bedroom, right? And I did this purposefully. I'm in a white t-shirt. And you can't even see what other, even if I'm in my underwear, you can't see that because it's just a head, okay? What I am doing here is just providing important information for podcasters. So persons who want to start their podcast, you can look over this video and this will have some important information for you. And that's the aim. The aim is in my particular podcast, and this particular one, it is the aim is to basically educate. And there's a particular hi, Luvia, right? Hi, Luvia. Thanks so much for joining us, right? So one of the things that everybody talk about is that I don't have fancy equipment to start. And I'm saying to you, if you have a phone, if you have a camera on that phone, this mic is $20, right? TT, right? Which is about 3 US. You have everything that you need to start a podcast. Right now, you're looking at a podcast via Zoom. And this is being basically streamed on Facebook and YouTube. So you have everything that you need for a podcast. What you need to do is start to build an audience. That's the first thing that you need. Before you need fancy equipment, before you need anything else, you need to build an audience. You need to provide information, or people must be watching your podcast, right, for a particular thing. And that leads me to the second thing. What is your podcast going to be about? What is it? Who are you trying to attract? Who am I speaking to? So this particular episode, I am speaking to persons who want to start a podcast, right? And what I'm doing is rebutting some of the objections that they may have in their mind, right, as to why they aren't starting a podcast, or what are some of the things that are keeping them back. The other thing that a lot of persons talk about is money. I have just shown you that you have a phone, right? You have a camera. If you could afford three US dollars, Zoom has a free platform for 40 minutes. You have everything. There's no money required to set up. That's it. And the persons who are online right now have not dropped off yet. So it's therefore there's some sort of value that you're getting from me speaking to you, right? Forget the aesthetics for now. The thing about it is that what you want to start doing is building an audience. So those were the one of the objections. So there were 5. The other objection that I got plenty was that persons were very insecure about the way that they sound or the way that they look. I'll tell you something, all right? Now, for instance, I have a very wide range. I'm a voiceover artist, right? And one of the reasons why I do voices is because I have a very wide range. So I can speak very, very low, or I can speak real high, right? I used to hate that about my voice when I was younger. I hated that about my voice. But the fact of the matter is that as a voiceover artist, that is one of my trumps over many persons, right? I can do a whole range of characters because of my voice. Even though you may have a dry, monotone voice, understand that there's a market for that, right? Gilbert Godfrey, who plays the parrot in um, Aladdin, has one of the most annoying voices ever. But he was able to take that and make a mint from those Aflac commercials, right? Long after he did Aladdin. So those insecurities, I want you to understand it's in your mind. I didn't take a shave today. I didn't trim. I didn't do any of those things. And there's a particular reason for that. Because at the end of the day, really and truly, the information that I'm bringing to the audience here is so important that they're not really listening to how my voice sounds, but more what is being said. They're not looking at my face, right? It's not in the best condition, but they are interested in the information that is being dispelled. And I want you to, that insecurity that you have, it's all in your mind, right? It is all in your mind. Understand that there's always going to be something that we don't like about ourselves. And I'm going to challenge you to think about it this way, right? If there's something that you don't like about yourself, right, then what you are saying is that your standards are higher than God's. Because God created you. He created you with that face, He created you with that voice, He created everything about you. And that's the way that He created you. And so for you to want something more, it means that, hey, when, and I don't mean to get too biblical or too preachy, but what the Bible said, when let us make man in our own image and likeness. So if God made you in his own image and likeness, and you are dissatisfied with yourself, then really and truly what you're saying is, you know what, God, I know this is how you make me, but this is not good enough. So I want you to think about that for a little bit. Think about that, you know. Hi, Mr. Kitty Bruno. Good evening. Right? Think about that for a little bit. And really and truly accept yourself for who you are. Because if you can't accept yourself, how do you expect an audience to accept you? And each and every one of us on this call right now, each and every person that is hearing my voice right now, has something to share with the world. There's a message that you have that only you can bring. And by getting yourself so involved in your insecurities, you are denying persons that message. All right. So I want you to think about that. All right. The other thing that I heard is about a place to shoot. I'm in a bedroom. I'm sure everybody here has a toilet. Have you ever seen a podcast in a toilet? No. Nobody's been doing a podcast in a toilet. Why don't you start one? We could call it Thoughts from the Throne. Right? Think about it. That has never been done. And what do people like to see? Stuff that hasn't been done. Every time you see this head, now most persons who do a podcast, they might do a whole body shot. All you see is my head. But every time you see that head, you associate that with learning something. And that's the whole point I'm trying to make. I am going to be doing a different type of podcast soon. And yes, it might have a studio style. But in that time, while I'm waiting for that, this is the style that I prefer. I prefer sitting down on the computer and somebody sitting down and listening to what I have to say because I'm a teacher, right? That's what I do. A part of what I do is teach. So a place to shoot, if you have a toilet, if you have a couch, if you have anywhere, a garden, a park, anywhere that you can shoot, you shoot, but make it your own. And don't feel that you have to have a fancy studio in order to have a podcast show. People want to come on for the content that you have. And you need to be able to provide good content before you do anything else, right? Before you invest in any kind of studio equipment. Provide good content. Provide something that people can come to you and see. All right. The other thing I saw was motivation. A lot of people talk about motivation, to come on and to do it. Let me tell you something. People never know, right? I do theater and I am always nervous before I perform. To do anything, even to come and do this podcast, I'm always nervous. That's who I am and that's how I am. And I have embraced that. But you know what motivates me? There's somebody, I don't know who it is, I don't know where they are, I don't know where they're from, but there's somebody who has to gain from something that I have to say. And a simple example is that I've been putting out ads, for persons who are interested in doing podcasts. And when you put out ads on Facebook, you get all kind of characters. People call you and give you proposals to be the girlfriend. People call you, give you proposals to be the boyfriend, all kinds of stuff. But there was one morning when somebody called, and for some reason, I just needed to answer that call. God nudged me to answer that call. And the person asked me to pray with them because they were going through a really, really difficult time. Now, this person doesn't know me. I don't know who the person is. But they may have seen a video that I did before and probably just seen me pray before we start the podcast. And that gave them the courage. A simple thing like that. I want to tell each and every one of you all here who is on the line right now that there's some message that you have to say that is going to affect somebody. And somewhere along the line in your podcast journey, somebody will walk up to you and say, hey, you don't know it, but by you doing this every week, it gave me courage. It gave me hope. It gave me something. Even if you're doing an entertainment podcast, you made me laugh. All right? But there's something that you offer that only you can. So people like Yvette, there's something that you offer that only you can. Gabriel, something that only you, Analdo, Ian, Luvia, something that you alone offer that I can't. And for that reason, and if not any other reason, right, you should have a podcast because somebody has something to benefit from what you have to say, you know? And I'm going to take it because I know, everybody asks me this other question, which is one of the other things that people ask is like, can you make money from doing a podcast? The answer is yes. The answer is yes, and there are many ways to make money from doing a podcast. But again, it's a biblical principle, right? Your gifts will make room for you in the presence of great men. I don't know any of you except Mr. Kiddy Bruno. That's the only person that I know personally. Many of you all are seeing me here for the very first time. You all don't have your camera, so I don't even know if you're listening to me. I don't know if you're washing wares while you're doing this. and just, have it on in the background. I don't know. But I know that for some reason, somebody showed up here. And for some reason, there's something that I have to offer. So I give it my very best all the time, every single time. Because when I do this, right, and I do it half-hearted, you know what Ian goes on to say? No, that wasn't so good. If I have to do a teaching, if I have to, we'll talk about the challenge that I have coming up. If I ever do this half-hearted, then there's no way I can benefit from that. All right? Because somebody's going to say, listen, this is a waste of time. All right? This is a waste of time. I shouldn't have come, or whatever the case might be. What I'm saying to you is that this can be a great income earner for you if you do it well. All right? If you do it to the best of your ability. The other thing that a lot of persons talk about is that the know-how. All right? And we talk about the know-how, a lot of persons say, well, I want to start a podcast, but I don't really know how to start. I don't really know, how to go about it and that kind of stuff. And I'll tell you something. I have invested a lot of money in learning to do podcasting and learning to do YouTube videos and learning to do many different things. The reason why is that I want to continuously get better and better and better. As I become better at my craft, right? The earning potential becomes easier because the better I become, the more that people hear, the more that people listen, the more that people benefit, right? The more they are gravitated to come to hear what I have to say. So one of the things that the know-how is that you have to prepare your mind to invest in what you're going to do. Yes, anybody could sit down behind a camera and talk, right? But there's a particular structure in which you want to address certain things. There's a particular structure in which you want to carry that podcast. I can tell you, for instance, we've started here at 8:30 sharp, right? We are not going to go beyond 9:15, right? And I have structured the podcast this way. I know I'm going to talk about these points. I know exactly. And there are some things going to happen in improv. Remember the phone rang? The phone rang. I didn't expect the phone to ring. The phone rang. I took off the phone and we continued, right? But at the end of the day, right, when I'm doing a podcast, everything is planned. It may look spontaneous. It may look like, I'm just talking, but I know what are the talking points and I know what it is I'm going to speak about. You have to invest in your craft because this is going to be, one of the ways that you communicate with persons. If I ask everybody, okay, how much hours in a day, right? People type in the chat for me, how much hours in a day, please. How much hours in a day? Let me see if y'all are up. If I'm just talking to myself, how many hours in a day? Let me see the chat. All right, somebody says 24. Yeah, okay, great. But it depends on whose day. You will have 24 hours to speak to somebody, right? Let's say we have 24 hours. But if you have a video or a podcast resting somewhere, then 100 people come to listen to what you've had to say, right? Then your day is more than 24 hours. You understand? Because you got to speak to 100 people, and let's say, for instance, your podcast is about 30 minutes, right? You got to speak to you had 3,000 minutes in that day, right? So you had 500 hours in that day when everybody else had 24 because you spoke to that many people for that amount of time. The point I'm trying to make is that you have something to say. And that is one of the mediums that people can be, blessed and touched by what you have to say. So for those of you all who are really interested in doing this, at a more professional level, or really interested in forget the aesthetics for now. What you're doing right now is you want to build an audience. You want to identify. So I could tell right now, every single person on this line is somebody that is interested in having a podcast. All right? I can tell that. So I've identified my audience. Now, here's the thing. For those persons who would have missed the podcast, right? I'm not going to just say, okay, I did a podcast and I just splatter it out now to the public. I'm going to now send it out to persons who I know interested in creating a podcast. You understand? So the content that you make must be relevant to the audience that you have. I can speak on several different topics, but I know that I have invited persons who are interested in doing a podcast today. And the one thing I want to one thing I want to add is that you don't have to be a podcaster to have a podcast. If you have a business, if you have if you're an entertainer, right? If you're a person who requires, audience to come, right? You might be selling something. You might have, you might be an entertainer, right? A podcast is an excellent way to engage with your audience and have persons buy from you directly your merchandise. Have persons hear your new music directly, right? For those of you all who could sing, you could come on your podcast and sing a song and say, ask, what does it sound like? You know what I mean? Get immediate feedback from your audience. So a podcast is not just for podcasters. It's a way to communicate with audiences. Let us say, for instance, you might be a plumber. Now, I don't know anything about fixing pipes, right? Absolutely nothing. But you are a plumber by trade. Having a podcast now puts you in a position of authority because you can now have your podcast and listen, there are simple things that you might be able to fix at home if you're a homeowner. And you could do a podcast stating, okay, listen, if you're a homeowner and your pipe is leaking, this might be the rubber that you have to change. You don't have to call a plumber for that. The reason being is that plumbing or any type of service business is limited by the time that you produce. All right. So if it is there's this major plumbing job where you can, let's say, a $10,000 plumbing job, but you become distracted by somebody who needs to get a rubber change for $200, right? Then you have to go and see about that and miss out on that $10,000 job. If you have a podcast and people can educate themselves and learn to do simple plumbing, when they have a major plumbing issue, who do you think they're going to call? You. You see what I'm saying? So as a business move, having a podcast is very, very important. And it's something that, if this has been something on your mind to do, I can guarantee you, we would give you a roadmap, basically how to start from not having a podcast, and by the end of the week, you're going to have your podcast launched. All right. So I told you all earlier about investing in yourself, investing in the things that you want to do, right? I would have shared with you all the challenge that I have next week. I know some of you all say, what is a challenge? So let me just tell you what a challenge is. Just like how we're going to meet here, all right? We're going to meet for an hour every night for 5 nights, all right? From 7:30, sorry, 6:30 Eastern. So an hour before that we started this evening, right? From Monday to Friday. and I'm going to have the video up for 24 hours just in case you can't come to the live challenge, right? And we will be discussing certain things like, your target audience. What are some of your ideas for a podcast show? What are some of the ways that you can make income doing your podcast? What are some of the ways that you can grow your audience? All right. All those are things that we're going to be doing. So I would have sent each and every one of you all a booklet. And in that booklet, it says 5 major mistakes persons who want to have a podcast, right, do. There's a breakdown from Monday to Friday, what will be the different topics that we'll be doing, right? And one of the things when persons ask me, well, I really don't know, I really took that to heart and I decided to design a challenge so that persons can know from start to finish how to plan your podcast. You don't necessarily have to do a podcast by yourself. You can have another person on your podcast. Sometimes I do have a guest on the show. All right. But as I said before, my show is basically to educate. When persons come to my show, it's not about the entertainment, it's not about the aesthetics. I will have an entertainment show later down, right? But this particular show has a particular purpose and it has a particular clientele. All right. Each clientele is based upon the particular topic that I'm dealing with. So today I have a lot of persons who are interested in podcasts that will be relevant to that particular audience, right? And in the challenge, I will show you how to now connect your different audiences together. Because here's the thing, everybody that I've targeted thus far, right, has come from the Caribbean. So here's what. When I have stuff like, let's say, for instance, I have movies or a television series with Caribbean content, even though you might be a podcaster, you might also be an audience member. And so when I want to say, okay, listen, this is the latest movie I've done, right? So for those of you all who don't know, again, my name is Steve Medwards. I do television, movie, and theater, acting, directing, writing, and producing, right? I also do my own podcast because I try to find opportunities for Caribbean people globally. And one of the things that I've found is that we as a Caribbean people do not use our voice. We have a lot of persons speaking for us. So especially here in the States, you look at a lot of the shows and the shows is Caribbean in nature, but you could tell that that's not a Jamaican accent. That's not a Grenadian accent. This person not really from Trinidad. And we are not creating enough content of our own to feed our Caribbean people. You understand? And that's why most of our children, and I know in Trinidad it's a big problem, are going around speaking with American accents. Now I have no issue with the Americans. I think America is a place that you have a lot of opportunity. But at the same time, I believe that you mustn't lose your identity. All right. So for the challenge, we have the general admission. It's 97 US dollars, right? And it's going to be basic. It's not going to be like this. It's going to be a session where, you'll be joining a private Facebook group and we'll be having the lessons. The lessons will have slides and so on. And as I said, it will be up for 24 hours. So you take your notes, you listen. But for VIP, which is 297 US dollars, it's going to be a Zoom type session like this. And it's going to be specific to the issues that you do have, right? So, like let's say, for instance, the shows that you're planning, those are the things we get into the nitty gritty of that, right? And then we go to the lesson of the day. So at this time, I don't know if any of you all would like to ask any questions. You could either type it in the chat for me, or you could open your video on your mic, which I would prefer, especially as you all will be podcasters soon. All right. Okay, Gabriel Williams. Yes, Gabriel, you have questions. Go ahead.
Pleasant and nice, Stephen.
Yeah, Gabriel, how are you going? So nice to have you, man. Thanks for coming.
I'm good, man.
Uh-huh.
You're welcome. Thanks for having this training here, this introductory podcast, this introductory video here. I
No
really
problem.
appreciate it.
I
And
appreciate your
I'm glad to know that you are, I'm glad to know that you're a Trini. All right. Based on what you said, you live in the United States. And just today I was commenting to my wife, not to my wife, but to my children. They're very fascinated with this mobile device. They're always on YouTube. They're always looking at videos. They're always watching shorts, etc.
Right.
And I'm telling them, just this afternoon, I told them, we need to be more creators and consumers.
Yes.
When we
I agree
consume,
100%.
when we consume, spend so much time consuming, you won't develop the ability to create and get the 80 million views or get the 100,000 views so that you can influence the narrative. You can influence what it is people do as normal.
Yeah.
Because many times, like my little my kids, my youngest, he can hear the American accent.
Yes.
Now that he lives in America, he's living on YouTube, the land of YouTube.
Yeah.
So much they picking up how they talk and how they express themselves and they exclaim, etc. So that is something that I connected with when you said we need to become creators. As you know, now it's Carnival in Trinidad and Tobago. My brother-in-law was here just a few minutes ago. He just left. That's why I came on late. And he was saying he works in a lot of these fetes. And he was saying that the type of audience that comes to these fetes is foreigners in the diaspora, people who live in the United States. They come to experience the Mokojambi, the Blue Devils, the creativity that exists. And if you look at the parade of the bands now, they're not even passing on Piccadilly Street anymore.
Yeah.
Because they find it too whatever.
Yeah.
But that is the genesis of the birth of all that energy. That's where it all come from.
Yeah.
But because that lack of creativity, someone else can easily swoop in and say, well, you know, I did this, and they take all the notoriety and they take all the revenues that come with it.
Yeah.
So that's just a lead up to the question that I have now. The question that I have for you, Stephen. Yes, it's good that we create. Yes, it's good that we produce this podcast. When it comes to revenues, have you figured out, being a Trinidad national, have you figured out how to monetize the YouTube, how to monetize the podcast in such a way that you actually receive money from these creator funds that are there in these platforms? For example, TikTok. TikTok doesn't have a creator fund for Trinidad and Tobago. So you can produce all the content and get all the likes that you want. You will not get any revenue.
Well, all right. So that's a very good question, and I'm going to answer it as fast as I can, right? Remember, people who paying you, right, don't have an interest in you owning anything. So I'll give you a simple example. When I do education like this, right, I do it to educate my client or my customer, right? So it's a lot different when I'm trying to be popular. And there's a huge difference between what is popular and what is profitable. Not everything is popular is profitable. You have to understand how to make something profitable for you. So let's say, if you don't mind asking, what do you do, Gabriel, as a job?
Well, surprisingly enough, ironically enough, I do business training. So I do entrepreneurship training.
All right. Excellent. All right. You do entrepreneurship training, right? If you have, let's say, for instance, you have a way to make me get...
I'll take off my camera to save the bandwidth.
Okay, that's fine. If you have a way, right, Gabriel, of making me as a business person, right, or as a business student, let's say I don't know if you're doing it as a, like, you know, for teaching for a subject, but let's say you do entrepreneur training, you're training entrepreneurs. And I, as a business person, making $10,000, right? Under your training, you can bring me to be making $50,000 a month. That training, that podcast that you have, right? You can take that now and monetize it. You don't have to get 100,000 business persons, right? If your information can create a difference or can create a result, right? Then you can take your podcast and make a digital product with it. But the thing about it is that everybody's trying to be popular and not everybody's trying to be profitable. See what I'm saying? So let's say, for instance, you have an exclusive group for business persons. And let's say you want to make $100,000, you know, you want to go from $10,000 to $100,000 a year. You charge people 50 US to be in that group, right? That's 50 US a month. Then what you have created there, right? And you have 100 persons in that. 50 by 100 is what? 5,000 US per month that you could generate. But you have to be able to provide the result. And that's a point of, you know, there are different ways to monetize it. You might be an excellent artist. So you might have t-shirts. So let's say, for instance, if I have certain clothes that I'm going to bring out, right? Different t-shirts and so different branding like that I have, right? And when I sit down on the stage, you know, I'm not going to be using this kind of head type of video anymore. I'm going to sit down where you can see my whole body. And every time I bring out one of my brands, right? And I sell that, like, okay, so Valentine's Day coming up, you know, I have a Valentine's Day special. That merchandise that I sell is mine. That revenue is mine. So there are several ways to monetize a podcast without it having to reach 1 million people. But what we try to do is that we try to become popular and not necessarily profitable. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you for that answer.
Yeah. Okay. So those are some of the things that, you know, I mean, I show persons how to make their podcast profitable doing what they do. Because your podcast, if you're doing training for entrepreneurs, is not for the general public. But if you don't target entrepreneurs for your podcast, right, then you will not be able to benefit from the financial rewards because you're trying to do something for everybody. And if I have a platform and I, you know, I mean, I for 1 million and something views, for you to pay me for that, right? And you expecting a great revenue. No, understand that you are the product in that thing. And that's why a lot of actors and so on had to go up in arms because they weren't getting paid the way that the persons who own the stuff getting paid. Right? And the thing about it is that we, as the persons who have the product, instead of trying to own the product and coming on platforms where it's profitable for us, we want to go where everybody goes. So that's the thing that, you know, I show people how to become profitable as opposed to trying to be popular. All right? Anybody else have any other questions? All right. Okay. So guys, I want to say thank you so very, very much. All right. I promise that it wouldn't go past 9:15. It is now 9:14. Thank you so very much for coming on. And I hope this was of some service to you. I thank you guys for being a part of it. And I hope to see you in the challenge next week. God bless. Good night.